Hello, this is Robert Sungenis with you tonight on August the 8th, 2019 for the first open question program designed to take your questions about issues regarding our movie The Principal, or anything else you have on your mind about cosmology, cosmogony, astrophysics, astronomy, physics, all those things that deal with outer space and how we interpret what's going on out there. As you know, most of our fans of The Principal know that our movie was in theaters in 2014 October. I can't believe it's already 5 years ago. Will be 5 years in 2 months. Time just flies by. But that was our first movie, The Principal. My producer, Rick Delano, and my director, KT, did an excellent job on making our movie, and yours truly stars in it with a bunch of other scientists. You see who we have there. Michio Kaku was top on our list in The Principal. Lawrence Krauss, Max Tegmark, George F.R. Ellis, probably one of the most renowned physicists alive today, 80 years old plus, and still kicking, but he's sort of the granddaddy of modern physics today. The other ones are relatively young, except for Michio. I think he's getting up there in years, but he's all over the place on in the media talking about his ideas, and we uncovered some of those in The Principal. Then we have some scientists on the other side of the issue, including myself and my co-author, Robert Bennett, who has a PhD in physics and with a specialty in general relativity. So he gave me a lot of help during my whole quest to make this movie, and throughout the years he's been with me since 2003 or 4, I think, when we first met each other. Actually, we met each other before that, and then I decided to. As a matter of fact, it's an interesting story with Dr. Bennett, my co-author, because when I started to get into cosmology and particularly geocentrism back in 2003, he was assigned to talk to me. You know, when I say talk to me, to try to persuade me, or actually check it out. You know, see if I really knew what I was talking about. And lo and behold, Dr. Bennett himself, who was not a geocentrist at the time, he was talking to me. Shortly thereafter, I think it was less than a year, became a full-fledged geocentrist after he analyzed all the evidence, a lot of which I had given him, but a lot of which he found himself. And then I asked him to be my co-author. You know, I figured what better choice would there be than a man with a PhD in physics, modern physics, that is, to help and thrust this project forward into the public. And he obliged, and there it went. So that was how many years ago now? That was 16 years ago. So, and he's still the same way and still kicking. And I wish him well. He's had a few health problems, but I think he's coming through it little by little. Anyway, this program was designed for your questions. So we have a few questions in the queue here. I'm going to wait to get to them until I get some more. And I do want to teach you a little bit, because one of the other movies I made just recently that is on YouTube, you can go find it under either my name or just put in the search engine the title, which is The Fool on the Hill. And this is a 2.5 hour movie, a little bit longer actually. I think it's 2 hours 43 minutes. That movie I made by myself, totally by myself, written, produced, and directed by yours truly. That movie, I think, is my best effort to explain this whole issue of geocentrism, Earth in the center of the universe, however you want to put it. That is my best effort. It tries to be entertaining at the same time that it teaches some high-level physics, if you can believe that. If I swing my arms around here occasionally, it's because I have a net problem, just to let you know. I'm not swinging at pink elephants. Anyway, back to the movie. So I just released that, back in July, I think, and doing quite well on YouTube, I believe. And it is, I tried to gear it toward people who knew a little physics, but not much. And I tried to educate them to physics along the way. But then there are other sections toward the end, like the first half of it. It's a lot simpler than the second half. So, and I gear the second half to those who are more educated in physics, who would understand some of the equations I use, and would see the overall picture as we put it together. And a lot of that depends on the teachings of Albert Einstein, believe it or not. You know, I sort of have a love-hate relationship with Albert Einstein, because, and you should probably know this before you watch the movie, so you know where I stand on him. He, on the one hand, the movie shows that he tried his best to get out from under all those experiments done in the 1800s, and there were about a half a dozen of them. And these experiments were showing that the Earth wasn't moving in space, okay? Whether you say space or ether or whatever it is, they could not detect the Earth moving. But everybody thought, after Newton, Isaac Newton, who wrote his Principia Mathematica in 1687, that you know, the Earth was moving, and there was no question about it. And as a matter of fact, I get into Newton a lot in the at least the second half of the movie, and I take all the myth away about Newton and what he was really all about. And you can boil his physics down to very simple notions, and then you deal with those notions. And you question whether the basis, the fundamental basis of his physics was correct, or if it wasn't correct, where did it come from? And why did he say it the way he said it? So we deal a lot with Newton in there. And after we deal with Newton, then we basically twist Newton around and look at the other side of the coin that Newton did not look at when he wrote his Principia, except for one little place in the Principia. And I point that out as well. But we do deal with Einstein, and then we go back to him. That idea, or that obstacle in his way, was the fact that all these experiments, like take Dominique Arago in the 1810s and 20s, and he did 2 experiments, and both showed the Earth wasn't moving. He's a French scientist. His name is on the Eiffel Tower. That's how famous he was. Then we had the experiments of George Bedell Airy from England. Probably one of the most famous of those 1800, the 19th century experiments. 1871 is when he did his. Then we had 3 times where Albert Michelson did his interferometer experiments, 1881, 1887, and 1897. So there are 3 there. And at that time, and they were all showing the Earth wasn't moving. So Einstein had some formidable opposition to trying to make it evident that the Earth was moving, whether it was rotating or revolving around the sun. And let me clear that up too. When we say revolving, we're talking about an object that goes around another object. Okay, so the moon revolves around the Earth. Okay, that is because it's one object revolving around another. If we say rotate, what we mean is that the object itself is rotating by itself. So the moon, if it rotated on its axis, it does actually once every 27 days. That's a rotation. Okay, just to clear up those terms. So anyway, Einstein had these formidable foes to heliocentrism that he had to fight. And not many people know this, but the whole theory of special relativity was spawned out of Einstein's desire to answer these experiments and to put them to bed, basically, to shut them up, and to proclaim to the world that heliocentrism was still correct and that Newton was on the right track, and we had nothing to worry about. There would be no civilization upheaval. There would be no, the Catholic Church was right after all. Einstein, the world savior, saved them from all of that. And that came in the theory of special relativity. Some people try to claim that Einstein invented special relativity because of Maxwell's equations. Maxwell's equations of electrodynamics were invented in 1865. He had basically 4 different equations, and they still use those today. As a matter of fact, they were so good. And they said that Einstein invented special relativity because he wanted to deal with the relative nature, or so he tried to put it on Maxwell's equations, that they were relative, they weren't absolute. Now Maxwell and all those who were living, the scientists that were around him at the time, considered Maxwell's equations absolute, in the sense that this is very intriguing. I write about this in my book, Galileo Was Wrong. They say, well, first of all, Maxwell, in doing experiments, what he would do is he would get a magnet, we all know what that is, and then he would move the magnet around an induction coil. And that's just a coil that makes electricity. Okay, you charge it up with electricity, and there would be a certain reaction between the magnet and the induction coil. But when he had the magnet stationary, as opposed to the induction coil, and then move the induction coil around the magnet, he would get a whole different reaction. And so he had to have 2 different equations. That's amazing. Think about that. You have a magnet stationary, and an induction coil is made to revolve around the magnet, and you get one reaction. Okay? And then you have the induction coil stationary, and you get the magnet to revolve around it, and you have a whole different reaction that takes 2 different equations. So what does this tell us? it tells us that Maxwell's equations are not relative. Because if they were relative, you would get the same reaction whether the magnet went around the induction coil or the induction coil went around the magnet. Okay, and that's what Einstein wanted to do. He wanted to make Maxwell's equations relative. Why? Well, because he was creating special relativity. Again, here's my gnat friend flying around me. And if I don't do anything, he comes right in my eye. So I have to try to get him away. Anyway, Maxwell, his equations and his results were absolute, not relative. But Einstein needed to make them relative because he was coming up with a relativity theory named special relativity. But he was first prompted into special relativity by basically the Michelson-Morley experiment. And he says this himself. I don't have to guess at this. Although there are a lot of authors that try to make it look like Einstein did not create special relativity from the Michelson-Morley experiment. And the reason for that is because they don't want to make it look like Einstein was deliberately trying to disprove the Michelson-Morley experiment, that it was just some peripheral idea he had that sort of fit into the puzzle afterwards, and he wasn't that concerned about it. No, he was concerned about it, okay? In 1922, he gave a speech in Kyoto, Japan, and said that the Michelson-Morley experiment was the primary motivation for him to invent special relativity. And we can see why. I mean, it's no secret. Because if science, modern science in the 1800s was showing the Earth wasn't moving, that would upset the whole world. Yes, civilization to its core would have been undone. Why? Because we had lived by Galileo and Copernicus and Newton for how many years? And how many times was the church condemned, basically, for getting it wrong with Galileo? And therefore, the church lost her authority over the whole world, because we found a boo-boo somewhere. We found a mistake, a big one, in its proclamation. First, the church said that this whole issue of Galileo was an issue of faith. Faith, okay? Because the Bible said that the earth was fixed and did not move. And the church backed that up and said, not only doesn't it move, it doesn't even rotate on its axis when it condemned Galileo. All right, so the church was, wagering the largest bet possible, its whole reputation, on this idea that the church didn't move. The whole weight of the Catholic Church was behind this, because they called heliocentrism a heresy. That's putting your whole weight behind the issue. If it was just a minor issue that had nothing to do with the faith, well, then not too many people would care. Okay? But the Catholic Church made it a big issue. So that means something. And, throughout history, let's say beyond the High Renaissance, starting at the High Renaissance and going into the Enlightenment in the 1700s and to modern science and philosophy and all this, the big enemy was the Catholic Church. Okay? Because the High Renaissance and the Enlightenment basically wanted to let man think out his own destiny, basically, to create his own morals, create his own destiny, and get God off the stage. If we couldn't get him out altogether, we would reduce his influence to such a minimum that nobody would really care anymore. And that's what the deists were all about when they came over to America, and the Freemasons. Okay, so their big enemy was the Catholic Church. And the Jesuits were on the other side of the issue, trying to defend the Catholic Church. As a matter of fact, Bellarmine himself was a Jesuit. Okay, so, and that's when the Jesuits were good. Not so good today. But at any rate, this is what the whole story is about. Who is going to be trusted who can mankind trust with the truth? Is it the church holding the word of God that said this audacious thing that the earth isn't moving? Or is it the scientists who by this time, beginning with Newton, let's say, where they weren't looking at the sky just as a bunch of bodies that they sort of had to get in the correct puzzle. Now we were talking about forces. What made the bodies move? That's why Newton became so famous. What put those bodies in those positions, you see? So he was way beyond Galileo. Galileo had a little bit of knowledge of force, but he just couldn't put it all together. And Newton came along and supposedly put it all together and gave us his famous equations, F equals ma, and his gravitational equation and all that. So it looked by that time that science had really nailed it down. Okay, we've got it. We've got it made because Newton has shown us the forces behind why we say that the Earth is moving around the sun. We now know that. So and as a matter of fact, I have another video out that I just put up a couple days ago called "The Status of the Anti-Copernican Decrees of the Catholic Church." And in there, I point out that when Newton published his Principia Mathematica in 1687, the Catholic Church assigned editors to his book, Jacquier and Lisieux, two Frenchmen. And what they did at the beginning of the book, they put a disclaimer on Newton's Principia. And they said something to this effect. The author, Newton, assumes that the heliocentric view or the Copernican view, and in order to examine his writings and edit them for our readers, we have to assume the same position, although we do not take his position because the supreme pontiffs of the Catholic Church have said that that is a heresy or that is wrong. Okay? And this disclaimer was put in each Catholic edition of Newton's Principia up until 1833. Okay, so that's 150 some odd years later that disclaimer is still in there. And what does it say? It says the supreme pontiffs, plural, were holding that the earth doesn't move. And so therefore we're bound by that. And so we're not going to agree with Newton. We'll just examine his book from a perspective that might look like we agree with him, but we really don't. Okay? That makes a lot of sense. If you're going to examine someone's work, you're going to have to know it better than he does if you're going to critique it. And that's what they did. So again, what I'm trying to draw here is the picture of one side against the other. Okay? You have the scientists who were coming into their own, starting with Newton, and they were looked at with high esteem. And you had the church on the other side who was dug in their heels, and they weren't going to budge from their tradition or their exegesis of Scripture. As a matter of fact, they doubled down. And so we had a war going on, basically. Okay? And Ptolemy by this time had been discredited, and it's unfortunate that some modern physicists like Stephen Hawking or even Einstein still use Ptolemy as the basis, but his system was found out by Galileo, and we got to give him some credit. At least he found one thing that was true, and that was that Ptolemy's model could not show the phases of Venus, because it put Mercury and Venus in the wrong place, basically, okay? And then after him came along Tycho de Brahe, and he fixed it. He basically fixed Ptolemy's model, and then the phases of Venus could be evident in the geocentric model. So you had a lot of the Jesuits, for example, siding with Tycho de Brahe, and they had departed from Ptolemy, although Ptolemy's model was the reigning model from, say, 150 AD to the 1500s. But at that time, nobody knew about forces. Nobody knew about gravity. All they were trying to put together was a geometric model. How can we put together the model so that what we see in the sky matches what we put on paper? Was their quest. Okay, and that's, it's not that hard to do. And the Indians were actually making different models. And if you get the thumb drive that I put the movie The Fool on the Hill on, you get all those animations. It costs $24.95, but so you get the Indian animations, you get the Ptolemaic, you get the Tycho de Brahe ones. There's 60 of them, okay? And you have all those at your disposal. I had never released them before. They were just snapshots in my books. But now you can get the live animations. And if you cannot get these anywhere else in the world. I'm going to tell you that right up front. These are original, and these are made by professionals. I got professional people to make these so that they look good, and they are accurate. They are the most accurate animations that I have ever seen. And they are animations of things that nobody's ever made an animation of before, okay? Whether it's stellar aberration, stellar parallax, all those issues that came up about the geometry of the models. So at any rate, back to the Jesuits had sided with Tycho de Brahe and his model against Kepler's model. Kepler came along at this time, and basically what he did was he added elliptical orbits to the planets, and that came closer to what we saw in the sky. Not exactly, but it came closer. And so the reigning heliocentric theory was Kepler's with the elliptical orbits of the planets. And to back that up, we had Newton's force dynamics that were showing why these planets would go around the sun and why the Earth, so they thought, would go around the sun, okay? So that's the war that's going on. So when Einstein's in this crucible, back to Einstein now, when he's in this crucible, he knows the history. He knows it very well. He did not work in a vacuum. Okay, as a matter of fact, his wife, Mileva, converted to the Catholic Church in 1905, the very year that he wrote his famous special relativity paper. And not only her, but her kids. They had 3 of them. And the marriage went downhill from then. And you can go read Einstein's quotes about the Catholic Church, and you'll see much animosity in his heart against the church, against its priests. And he held Galileo up in high esteem. And he said he was very happy that Galileo stood up against the priests of the Catholic Church who were saying that the earth didn't move. And Galileo came and was our savior. So I think there's 3 scientists that Einstein said were his mentors. And Galileo was one of those. I forget who the other 2 were. Could have been Newton. Not sure. But at any rate, that's where he was in history. So I'm trying to draw a picture for you to say that this is just not about scientists coming up with scientific formulas and scientific ideas. These men are part of their society, part of their culture, part of the zeitgeist. And at this time, the zeitgeist was not like it was in the Middle Ages. This zeitgeist was, if not atheistic, it was agnostic. And I think as time went on, they become more atheistic. If you talk to scientists today, they're a lot more atheistic than the scientists before them who were agnostic. And the difference between the two is an agnostic says, well, I don't know for sure. An atheist says, I don't believe God exists. Okay, that's the difference. And there was a big shift going on at that time. You see, because if the earth is in the center of the universe and not moving, obviously God exists. Why? It's not too hard to answer. Because if the earth is in the center, that means it couldn't happen by time and chance. Somebody had to put it there. The only object in the sky that has life on it, in abundance, plants, animals, human beings, advanced beyond, the amoeba and the paramecium. We're thinking beings. We're intelligent. We talk. We create beauty. We sing songs. We write poetry. We write big equations, and we're something. Okay, and if this is the only place, because they found no other, that houses these kinds of beings, well, what must have been behind it to create it all, for Pete's sake? I mean, think about that. Any scientist worth his salt knows that in order to make something happen, to make something good, you got to put a lot of work on the other end of it to cause it to happen. Okay? So if he finds that the very earth that he lives on is in the center of the universe, and he thinks his universe is billions of light years large, and he doesn't see any life on other planets, even the planets that are revolving around suns out there, they're either too big, too small, too far away, too close, to this or to that, to support life as we know it. And so their conclusion is there is no life out there. We're the only life. Well, that makes us special. That's what the whole basis of the principle was when we made the movie, that we're special. Okay? So if the earth is in the center, as the church has said, well, that automatically means there's a God behind it. And if there's a God behind it, what don't they like about that? What they don't like about that is the fact that if there's a God, that means, they're responsible to him. They know that a being that is much greater than them is going to deserve some recognition from them. And not only recognition, worship. Not only worship, he's going to peer into your life, find out what kind of life you're leading. That's a little bit too privy, isn't it? Yeah. Because most of these scientists live sinful lives. I can vouch for that. And I can tell you that it's the proof in the pudding when you read their own works. Einstein is right up at the top of the list for leading an immoral life. I've written about that also in Galileo Was Wrong. Copernicus himself lived an immoral life. Galileo, immoral life. Although he repented 3 years before he died. And that's in another book that's, I quote from, in Galileo Was Wrong. The author's name is Wooten. At any rate, this is what's at stake. Okay, so when Einstein comes along, and he basically has to save the world by buttressing the heliocentrism taught by Newton and Galileo, we're at a crucial time. And it's interesting because when Michelson did his first experiment in 1881, that was, almost 25 years before Einstein wrote his 1905 paper on special relativity. In other words, this experiment of Michelson's that showed the Earth wasn't moving caused the scientific world to be scratching its head in wonder and astonishment without an answer for a quarter century. Okay? And it was compounded after Michelson did his experiments again and got the same answer as he did before, that the earth wasn't moving. So this is a big deal. Took him a quarter century to come up with an answer. And the answer, as you will see when you watch the movie I made, The Fool on the Hill, again, available on YouTube, the answer wasn't anything spectacular at all. As a matter of fact, what it had to do was it had to turn physics upside down. The classical physics that we once knew, it had to turn it upside down and start from scratch, basically. And that's the only way he could come up with at least a plausible answer to why these experiments were showing that the earth wasn't moving. Now, I could get into why that's the case, but not right now. You can, if you want the details of that, I'm just giving you an advertisement for the movie. It's free. Go look at it, and you can write to me and tell me what you think. But anyway, that's what we're dealing with, okay? Now, I said I had a love-hate relationship with Einstein, and let me tell you why. Because in the first instance, he tried to sweep all this evidence that the earth wasn't moving under the rug, all these experiments that were done in the 1800s, especially Michelson's, and create this new theory of physics to deal with it all that was basically absurd at its core. And I go into that into the movie. All right. So on the one hand, he's trying to save heliocentrism so that the world doesn't have to have an upheaval and go back to the Catholic Church, you see. That's the ramifications of this, because if the church was right, Galileo was wrong, and no scientist could explain it away because the experiments were so clear, then that means we'd all be worshiping at the feet of the Pope. Modern society just wasn't going to do that. So that's why Albert Einstein is held up as the greatest scientist ever known. It saved the world from having to bow to the Pope and the church at large, because the church itself had been teaching this before Galileo for 1600 years. Okay? It never became a big issue because nobody raised a fuss about it before. But as soon as somebody out there who claimed to be a Catholic raised a fuss about it, well, then the church had to deal with it. And that's the way the church does with everything. Okay? They believe and practice the same thing, for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and they don't make a fuss about it until somebody else tries to make a fuss about it. And usually those who make a fuss about it are those who try to get away from what the church had taught for 1600 years, like Galileo. Okay? And before him was Foscarini. Father Foscarini. He was a priest, Catholic priest, who was touting heliocentrism. So the church had to deal with him. But before, she had never really had to deal with it. And then once she had to deal with it, then she had to make a doctrine about it, so that the trouble would not haunt the world any longer, because the church is responsible to keep its parishioners, its believers, knowledgeable about the world and the faith so that they don't fall into sin. Okay? And that's the issue. That's the church's job. And that's her only job, basically. And so that's why it's such a big deal. But of course, if you're a modern man of the world, and the Catholic Church is the last on your list of things, your bucket list to do, and you're all wrapped up in, all the advances of science and technology and this and that, and you didn't give two hoots about the Catholic Church, well, you're going to try your best to turn that evidence around. And that's what Einstein did in 1905 with his special relativity theory. Okay? Now, that's why I hate Einstein. Okay? When I say hate, I don't mean, personally hate. I'm using that as a colloquial term in the sense of, I hate what he did. Okay? But 10 years later, In 1915, Einstein has to invent another theory to basically supersede the first theory, the special relativity theory. Okay? It has to supersede. And it superseded it because the first theory did not include two major components: gravity and inertial forces. And if you've ever looked out into the universe or walked the earth, what's the first thing you run into? Gravity. You can't avoid it. Okay? And there's gravity in every sector of the universe. And there are inertial forces. Okay? Inertial forces is just a cute little term. Again, I'm swatting at gnats here. It's a term that refers to the centrifugal, Coriolis, and Euler forces. Okay? And they become very important in Einstein's second theory, the general relativity theory. But at any rate, he had to invent this new theory to replace the special theory. Although today, in modern science, the trick they do is if they can't answer the question by general relativity, then they'll try to use special relativity. If they can't answer by special relativity, they'll try to use general relativity without admitting that there's a contradiction. That's the kind of science we have today. Okay? My co-author, Robert Bennett, has a fit every time he sees this. And anyway, but so he invents the general theory of relativity that has to include gravity and inertial forces. And what does he find? What he finds is that the very denunciation of an Earth-centered, non-moving Earth that he decried in 1905 with his special relativity theory suddenly came back into vogue with his 1915 general theory of relativity. Why? Well, the equations of general relativity demand that they be relative, or another term that we would use is co-equivalent. Co-equivalent. Remember that thing about Maxwell I told you, where he had an induction coil and a magnet? All right, and he in one part of the experiment, he had the induction coil tied to the table, and then he made the magnet rotate. He made the magnet revolve around the induction coil, and he got a certain result, and he put that into an equation. Okay, he made all his measurements, and then he replaced the induction coil with a magnet and tied the magnet to the table, and then made the induction coil revolve around the magnet, and he got a whole different result that he had to put in a whole different equation. So what did that tell us? That told us that electromagnetism is not relative, because each one had their different result. If they were relative, then they would be co-equivalent, and you could use the same equation for either experiment. Okay, that didn't happen. So that is Maxwell's equations are the total antithesis of relativity. Okay, and that always stood out like a sore thumb with Einstein. At any rate, when he's developing his general relativity theory, and this is all about motion, everybody's got to understand what motion is, what causes things to move, what stops them from moving, what makes them revolve, what makes them go in a straight line. All that stuff has to be known. That's what physics is all about. Okay, so the general relativity theory and the co-equivalence that was required of it required two scenarios that were the same, force-wise. One was an Earth that was rotating in a fixed universe. Okay, that's easy to imagine. Earth rotating on its axis in a fixed universe. What are we going to see? We're going to see all those stars go around us every night. We're going to see the sun go around us every day. Okay? But general relativity also required that by the principle of co-equivalence, that the universe be allowed to rotate around a fixed Earth. And what are you going to see if the universe rotates around a fixed Earth? You're going to see the same constellations go by night after night. You're going to see the sun go by day after day, okay, because the universe is rotating around the Earth. And I use rotate there because it's a solid sphere. It's all one unit. It's one ball basically rotating. So that's why I use the word rotate, not revolve. All right, so it's rotating around this fixed Earth. You're going to see the same things in the sky that you see in the other version, where the Earth is rotating in a fixed universe. That's what general relativity basically boils down to. Okay, and then there's all kinds of ramifications from that. The speed of light, the inertial forces, they come back mightily in the version where the universe is rotating around a fixed Earth. And the speed of light changes. Okay, this is very interesting because we were told by Einstein that the speed of light was constant in special relativity. Okay, but in general relativity, speed of light is not constant. It can go any speed, faster or slower. All right, and Einstein admits this himself. Well, why was it constant in the special relativity theory? It was constant because it didn't have any gravity or inertial forces to deal with. It was a pristine environment that Einstein had created for special relativity. It didn't have to deal with the very forces that permeate the universe. Well, that was convenient. Okay, and there's a reason why he made light constant in special relativity. And that's because he had two choices. Either he made the Earth constant, that is not moving, or he made light constant, that is, it can never change its speed. He had two choices. And which one do you think he was going to choose, being in that hot crucible between modern society and the Catholic Church? The Catholic Church who had condemned Galileo and the very world that Einstein thought he lived in. Okay? That's what it was all about. So if you have a choice to make light constant or the Earth constant, and you're a modern man, you're going to choose light as your constant. So light became Einstein's absolute. Okay? So, but that's why he was able to make light constant in special relativity, but in general relativity, you can't do that. Because if the universe revolves around a fixed Earth, that means you're going to have tremendous inertial forces out there in the remote parts of the universe. You're going to have a lot of centrifugal force, and you're going to have a lot of Coriolis force. And that's going to affect the speed of light. As a matter of fact, the further you would go away from the Earth, the faster the speed of light will be in that environment of the inertial forces. And I'm not making this up. Watch the movie. I quote this right from famous physicists who have written books about general relativity. Okay? Why haven't you heard this on the CBS News or CNN or MSNBC? Because it's all kept quiet. That's why. No one wants to upset the apple cart. As revolutionary as it is, no one, because everybody's living comfortably. Okay? And we don't have to have the Catholic Church breathing down our neck now. We have a nice buffer between civilization and the Catholic Church, who will stop pointing, who as soon as we let it into our lives, will start pointing out our sins. And we love our sins. We can't stop living by them. And so we don't need another conscience telling us we have a hard time dealing with the conscience we have. We don't need another one pointing directly at us and telling us that we're living sinful lives. And so science acts as a nice buffer between civilization and the Catholic Church. Okay, that's what it's all about, folks. beneath the veneer of the scientific world and the TVs and the radios and the papers that are written, the books that are written, the speeches that are given. It's all veneer, okay? I'm telling you what's underneath of it. That's why this subject is so important for people to understand. So there we are with general relativity. And so that's why I love Einstein on the other hand, okay? I love him because he finally came to the realization that there was no escape from those experiments done in the 1800s. There was no escape. He tried to create this theory, special relativity, that was flimsy at the start and became even more flimsy as it went on. And it was like a house of cards that just fell. And that didn't work, so we basically had to go back to the drawing board again with general relativity. Little did he know that general relativity would bring him right back to the same geocentric universe he tried to escape. Okay? And you might say that Einstein was hoisted by his own petard, and that he was. Okay? So that is basically what the movie's about. Now, also, the movie, and I'm just going to spend a little bit more time on this, and I'll take some questions here. See, once I get going on this stuff, you know, it's just hard to stop. It's like a ball rolling down a hill. One thing leads to the other. But I think it's good for you to know this background, at least from me talking about it to you. You'll see the same in the movie, but at this rate, I think this serves as a good introduction for you. One more thing is, remember we talked about Newton, and Newton's whole physics was based on the fact that he asserted, not proved, he asserted that space was absolute. If anybody knows anything about Newton's physics, he believed in both absolute space and absolute time. What we're going to talk about here is the absolute space side of that issue. Absolute space, what does that mean? It means space is absolute. It does not move. It is not affected. It is not changed. It's absolute, okay? But we're going to pay attention to the motion side of absolute space. That means it can't rotate. Another reason why Newton's universe can't rotate is because it's infinite, okay? And he chose an infinite universe to deal with some other problems that was coming up in astronomy and physics. Of course, they never solved that problem. Even if you make the universe infinite, you create other problems, and one of those is Olber's paradox, which means if the universe is infinite, then you're going to see light all the time. And that's just the natural consequences of an infinite universe with infinite bodies of light. You're going to get infinite light, basically. Okay, so they didn't really solve their problem. They just created another one. And that's what usually happens in science. Is they try to solve one problem by fudging the figures, or by making up things, or by some exaggerations or whatever, and they'll put the Band-Aid on the problem they have now, and everybody says, "Oh wow, look at science! They solved the problem." Yeah, but little do they know they created about a dozen more problems, because the solution they have, although it seems to work, really doesn't work if you look at it very closely. And then it upsets a lot of other things that they thought they knew before, and they find out that they don't know them. So whatever. So the point here is Newton's absolute space, and that was essential to Newton's physics. Essential, absolutely. Because Newton's physics is based on linear motion. Now, what we mean by that is everything has to travel in a straight line, okay? And the only way it can go in a curved line is if a force is put on that object. If the object is moving, the natural tendency is to go in a straight line here's the problem though. How are you going to define a straight line if the space that the object moves is not absolute? If the space is moving, then obviously the object isn't going to move in a straight line, is it? At least relative to an outside observer watching both the space and the object. Okay? So in order for Newton to have his linear motion in his equations, you had to have an absolute space. So in other words, let's take the Earth and the Sun. If the Sun is in the center and the Earth is going around it, what are the two forces, linear forces, that are causing that to happen, causing the Earth to go around the Sun? First linear force is actually a radial force, but we'll just call it linear, is the Sun's gravity pulling on the Earth, the smaller Earth. So the Earth is going to fall into the Sun unless there's another force that causes it to escape the Sun. And that's another linear force, and that's called inertia. So as the Sun's trying to pull in the Earth in the Newtonian system, the Earth is trying to move in a straight line. So here's the Sun, the Earth is trying to move in a straight line away from the Sun, okay? And that's because the Earth has inertia. Now where it got the inertia is another problem for Newton. Yeah, he doesn't have an answer for that. Except the fact that the Earth would have to have been pushed initially by some other force. But where did that force come from? And then where did the force come that moved that force? You know, so you go back in a digression, and you don't know where you're going to go. At any rate, the inertia is a straight line force. Okay, so if you add two vectors, force vectors, one against the other, you're going to have a curve as the result. Okay, that's basic physics. And that's why in that system, the Earth goes around the Sun. All right? So you need an absolute space in order to define what a straight line is. Otherwise, you would never be able to say it's a straight line. Okay? Very important. And that stood. I mean, it made sense to everybody. And it makes sense right now, doesn't it? I mean, it seems like it's credible. Okay? So everybody went with it. I mean, Leibniz had a little argument about the sources of these forces, and he had some competition, Newton did, but he won the day. Okay? He won the day, and everybody listened to him. Immanuel Kant, the world's most famous philosopher at the time, sided with Newton's physics, and Immanuel Kant actually was called the father of cosmology because he was so into astronomy and physics and things of that nature. He wasn't just a philosopher. Of course, Newton wasn't just a scientist either. He spent more. Okay, so Facebook just came on a few seconds ago and said that because this program was going live to the news feed, whatever that means, if you guys are still with me, I know there was a lot of questions. Okay, Ben, Kate, see you. Everybody else come back because I just got cut off for some reason I don't know by Facebook, so I just got back on, and hopefully everybody else sees this and can come back on, because I planned on going for a half hour longer up until 8:30 Eastern Daylight Time. Let me see, where was I? I'll keep talking, keep swatting at the gnats until I get some people back, and that's a shame because all the questions you wrote on your on the feed here are gone. All right, we'll have to figure out what the problem is before we do the next program next week, next Thursday, same time, same channel. Okay, so anyway, I was for those of you who are not with us any longer, I'm sure this will be recorded, put back on Facebook, and you can go and review it afterwards. But I was dealing with Newton, and I said that, if I remember correctly, Newton spent much more of his time writing theological treatises, believe it or not. Most of his books were about religion, and he even predicted the end of the world. He said it was going to occur in 2060. Now, but here's an interesting fact. 2060 is still, 40 years, 41 years away, okay? And it might seem plausible to some people, but the way Newton arrived at that figure was he said that the Catholic Church, now here again is where the antipathy against the Catholic Church comes to the fore in a scientist's mind. Newton hated the Catholic Church, okay? And the way he got to 2060 as his date for the end of the world is by saying that the church had become corrupt by 1260, and then there was an 800-year period. I forget where he got this. I have to go back into my notes, but I was just reminded to say this because of the fact that we were talking about Galileo in the Catholic Church and Einstein in the Catholic Church. Even Galileo hated the church. I mean, Galileo, I found out, was part of an underground movement to undermine the Catholic Church until he repented. He had a very deep conversion in 1639, which was 3 years before he died in 1642. Okay, and that was a real hard conversion. So while he's delving into this heliocentrism, he's basically a heretic underground trying to upset the Catholic Church. And he just couldn't help himself because of his personality, where this whole scheme bubbled over, you might say, and was put in front of the Catholic Church by his own mistakes, basically, by his own bravado, you might want to say. So he was hoisted by his own petard as well. Newton, same thing. Again, hated the Catholic Church. What he did was he got the number 800 from somewhere in Scripture. No. Oh, here's where I had it backwards. All right. So what he did was he said by 800, the Catholic Church had become corrupt. Okay. So then he goes to Apocalypse 12, where it has the woman put into the woman who's chased by the dragon, and she goes into basically a safe place for 1260 days. Okay, and so what Newton is saying that the church is not the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is the dragon, basically coming after this true church that Newton belongs to for 1260 days. And then he converts the 1260 days to years. And then he says you add the 1260 years to the 800 AD where the church became corrupt. And what do you come up with? 2060. Okay. So that's his rationale for the end of the world. All right. So now I mentioned that all because I want you to see the larger picture. Okay. These scientists are not coming out of a vacuum. They're living, breathing men who have a religious side to them, whether they admit it or not. And some of them did very much admit it. And they have a mathematical and a scientific side to them, okay? But these are men. Men have opinions practically about anything you talk about. They have an opinion about, all right? Especially the more intelligent ones. They have an opinion about everything, all right? So this is the kind of crucible that we are in with these scientists. And don't let any scientist ever tell you that he's not influenced by theology or the Bible or religion. These guys, that's all they think about. Okay? I can tell you that's all they think about. Because they know they're immortal, and they're wondering where they're going to go when they die. And if there's a God out there, they want to make sure that they at least have thought about it, if not have prepared themselves in some way, shape, or form. Okay? So, that, again, I can't impress that enough on you, all right? I think I don't say this enough in my books about the religious side of these scientists. But at any rate, so Newton's physics deals in straight lines and forces that go in straight lines, and the result is curves. Okay, that's the best way to put it. All right, so Ernst Mach, another physicist, comes along 250 years later, and Einstein, who is contemporary of Ernst Mach, at least for a while, they come along and they look at Newton's whole physics and they say, what's the flaw here? And they actually use that word. The word they use is defect. There is a defect in Newtonian mechanics. What is that defect? Well, the defect is the presupposition that he started with when he made his physics. What is that presupposition? The presupposition is that the space is absolute. They both agreed on that, Ernst Mach and Albert Einstein. The presupposition is that space is absolute. Where did he get that from? He doesn't tell us. He doesn't tell us. So it's assumed. Why is it assumed? Well, because here's the truth. If you want a heliocentric universe, wherein you want the Earth to go around the sun and not the universe to go around the Earth, you must have an absolute space. And then you would create your equations to coincide with that absolute space. Okay? So absolute space, what is that again? That's a space, that's a universe that doesn't move. And as we said before, Newton thought it was infinite. Okay, so obviously an infinite universe can't move, because where's it going to go? All right? So it can't move, it's absolute, and thus you have to have a physics that deals in straight lines, whether it's gravity or inertia. Both travel in straight lines. And if they combine, then you get a curved line. Well, that fit like a glove into the need for supporting heliocentrism, because the sun's gravity was stronger than the Earth's gravity, okay? And if the sun is still, doesn't have any inertia, and then if the Earth moves, it's going to move in a straight line, and then the gravity is going to pull that straight line and make it a curved line. Boy, it just fits like a glove, okay? Now, there was this other thing that, excuse me, I'm going to get this gnat here. I missed him. There was this other thing that Newton had, and he said that both bodies revolve around the center of mass. All right, so we can understand that, and that's just an artifact of gravity. You basically have to come to that position. But that doesn't disrupt this idea of the straight lines, okay? Gravity is a radial straight line, inertia is a straight line. So Mach and Einstein said, well, look, if you take away the absolute space, then what's going to happen to those straight lines? Well, they won't be straight anymore. They'll be curved. And isn't Einstein's general relativity all about curved space? You ever hear that before? Curved space, where you put an object, like say the sun, in the middle of the space, and the gravity of the sun is supposed to pull in the space and make it curved. Okay, now does that all make sense? Okay, because that's just the opposite of what Newton said. All right, the space doesn't curve, it stays absolute. It's the forces that on the bodies that make them look like they're going into a curved trajectory. Okay, so Einstein's and Mach's physics were quite different than Newton's. All right, so when they said his absolute space was a defect, there's a lot unwritten about what that word defect means. Basically, it means that Newton's whole system was false. Because if you can't assume that the space that the object is traveling in is absolute, you have no basis for making equations. You might make equations that fit your system, but the question is, $64,000 question is your system, the presuppositions of your very system, are they correct? All right? You just can't assume that they exist and then make a whole mechanics based on that assumption that you haven't proven. Okay? So that's why there's this, this big, but you won't see that in science textbooks. You'll see, oh yeah, well, Einstein's a little different than Newton here, and but basically they're saying the same thing. No, they're not, because they are two diametrically opposed systems. One deals in straight lines, the other deals in curved lines. Okay, and where the two meet, it's not here. Okay. Now let me draw out the implications of all this. When Einstein said that things are now going to be based on curved lines, not straight lines, and that meant, as I said before, that under his principle of co-equivalence, you would either have an Earth rotating in a fixed universe or the universe rotating around a fixed Earth. Let's just take this scenario of the universe rotating around a fixed Earth. And Einstein talks about this in his books. Again, I'm not making any of this up. I'm getting it from the experts, okay? It's just that I have a way of looking at it that nobody else is going to be looking for, because they're not looking to support geocentrism. I am, because I'm looking to support the church that made that doctrine, because the church is guided by the Holy Spirit. Yep. That's it. That's what it's all about. If it wasn't about that, I wouldn't be here tonight or any night. Okay? Because each of us has to answer that ultimate question about what we're doing here and where we're going. And this is one subject that helps us to get there, because it goes right to the core. Right to the core. Who's right and who's wrong. Who has the answers and who doesn't. Okay? That's what it's worth fighting for. So anyway, in Einstein's geocentric universe, and we'll call it that because that's what it is. If you have a universe going around a fixed Earth, that's geocentric, any way you call it. Okay, so if that's the case, well, what happens? How are those forces working? Well, the universe is going around, rotating. Okay, it's not going in a straight line, it's in a curved line because it's rotating. All right, and so that's an acceleration. Okay, an acceleration is where the speed and or position of the object changes from moment to moment. So the universe is accelerating. In an acceleration, you have angular momentum. When you have angular momentum, you create inertial forces. And those inertial forces are, as we said, the centrifugal force, which causes things to move outward. And most important is the Coriolis force. The Coriolis force. Look this up on Wikipedia. You'll get a lot of stuff there that isn't relevant, but a lot of stuff that is. One thing you'll get that's relevant is that the Coriolis force is twice the magnitude of the centrifugal force in a rotating object of the universe going around a fixed Earth. So what does that mean? Well, it means that if we just had the centrifugal force, due to the angular momentum of the universe, then all the stars and planets would be shoved to the rim of the universe, and they could not escape, because at those distances, we're talking about billions of miles, okay? I'm not going to talk in light years because the speed of light changes the further you go out, according to Einstein. Okay, so we can't say light years. You can only say light years if you're talking from a special relativity framework, but special relativity has nothing to do with forces. So we'll dispense with that. The whole light year thing is it's just false. All right, so we'll just use miles or meters, whatever you want to use. They're way, way far out there. So the centrifugal forces, as even admitted by general relativist physicists, they're tremendous out there. Okay, so then the farther out you go from the fixed Earth, the stronger they will be. Okay, so but at the same time, you have this Coriolis force, and that is an inward force that's almost like a curve. Okay, it's an inward force, and it's twice as strong as the centrifugal force. Twice. So what you get is a net centripetal force. That is, centripetal means toward the center. You get a net centripetal force, and what that means is that all the heavenly bodies out there, with the universe rotating in a 24-hour period, okay, it's going to have tremendous forces, but the Coriolis force is so strong it's going to keep all those bodies right where they are. So that when you look at the constellation Orion, you see the same 3 stars in the belt every night. Why? Well, if the universe is rotating, what's holding those stars in those positions? It's the combination of the centrifugal and the Coriolis force. This is all from Einstein, by the way. Okay? So that's what you get when you have general relativity. You get a rotating universe with all the necessary forces to keep the planets, the stars, and everything else, and the sun, all in their positions and all functioning just as we see them every day. Okay? That's what's important. So, I forgot to bring down my water tonight. So my throat's going. I knew it's an hour and 20 minutes is about all I'm good for. But I will try to. So I'm going to save these last 10 minutes for questions. But go see the movie, The Fool on the Hill. It's unlike any other movie you've ever seen. Okay, see that. All the stuff that I've said tonight will be verified by that movie. All the notes are there at the end. It's got good music. It's got good entertainment. So give it a whirl. Anyway, let's see what we got here. All right. Kate, I still love you, even though you go to a diocesan Latin Mass and not the SSPX. Well, thank you, Kate. I love you too. By the way, our church uses, our Novus Ordo church that has the Latin Mass uses a paten and an altar rail. So we don't have the problem that you complained about last night. But that's another topic. Diame, church definitely corrupt. You're right about that, Diame. No argument from me. It is corrupt. We have very few faithful clerics left. And how long it's going to hold out, I don't know. I hope Jesus comes back tomorrow, to be honest with you. We'll be through with the whole thing. But yes, to your question. Ben says, hello, Robert, I appreciate your great work. Did any church fathers, popes, or saints in the Catholic Church talk of the gospel and the stars? Constellation zodiac, like Virgo representing Virgin Mary, Leo representing Christ, etc. Seymour. Excuse me. I'm not talking of astrology, but astronomy. I know that some Protestants like D. James Kennedy believed in it. Also, when will your 4.5-hour docudrama, The Church vs. Galileo, be released? Please. Thank you. Ben, I wish I could get that thing done tomorrow. I'm working on it right now. We've got 5 scenes done. We have 14 more to go. And as I said before, my producer, Keith, has been on a hiatus now for almost 3 years, working for somebody else who pays him more than I do. So, and it's, you know, I just can't get him back. I just, you know, so I have to work piecemeal on this myself from here on out. But we are working on it, I just want you to know. Okay, so now the new video I just put up, it's an hour and 37 minutes. That one is called the status of the anti-Copernican decrees of the Catholic Church. That is quite a bit of a portion of the Church versus Galileo movie. So you might want to look at that. That's an hour 37 minutes out of the 5 hours, basically. Here goes my voice. All right, so the second question was, did the fathers talk about the a little, not much. Okay. The obvious ones are, of course, Virgo being the Virgin Mary, Leo being the lion, Jesus, and they're right next to each other in the constellation sky. Okay, so it's easy to attribute some theological issues to the zodiac. I don't like to do that personally. I put it out there for people who do like it, but I don't like to get into that stuff. Because there's just so much other stuff in the zodiac and the world that you can't explain by theological premises and stuff like that, except the fact that God created it all and made it one working unit. I mean, that was obvious. But whether there's a sign, and all those constellations, they weren't named by Christians. They were named by pagans. So at least most of them were. The planets were named by pagans. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, they're all what? Greek gods, or not Greek gods, Roman gods. Mars, so, what do you do with that? That's a pagan world because they got to it before we did. So that's why I don't like to put too much stock in that stuff. Okay. I could go on, but Diami says pseudoscience is a religion, and that is certainly true. Thank you, Diami, for that comment. Yeah, they call it scientism today, okay? And they don't wear priest garb and distribute communion and hear your confession and read from the Bible. It's a religion. And they have different ways of distributing their communion, so to speak, or reading from their Bibles, so to speak. Albert Einstein is their Moses right now. As a matter of fact, in my movie I was just talking about, A Fool on the Hill, one of Einstein's biographers, his name is Abraham Pais, P-A-I-S. He makes an analogy to when Einstein came on the scene and says, a new Moses has arrived with the new law of science. I just, he meant it in the kindest way, I'm sure. I, meant it or took it, interpreted it in the funniest way, of course, because it just shows you that science and their biographers think of science as their religion. And Einstein, as far as his notion of God went, was that the universe was God. And he says, I got this from Spinoza, the philosopher, and he followed Spinoza. He did not believe in a personal God whatsoever, okay? And that's the difference. All men have notions of God, but what they promote is a God that's not personal. Why? Well, because a personal God is one who's going to relate to you personally. And if he relates to you personally, what's he going to do? He's going to look at your sins and say, hey, if you want a relationship with me, let's clean up your act first. Okay? It's not hard. I can help you. And if you clean up your act, then we can have a personal relationship. If not only will we not have a personal relationship, you'll be in a place where forever you cannot have a personal relationship with me, God of the universe. Okay? That's the difference. And all men think about this, believe me. They think about it every day, one way, shape, or form. They think about it. Anyway, Diana says, math is not reality. There's a certain truth to that. Math is not reality. It's just a representation of what we think reality is. But sometimes it's quite evident. Like if you see an apple and then you see another one next to it, how many apples do you have? You have two. Okay, that's mathematics. Now, it's hard in that sense to deny that mathematics has a reality. All right. So because you have two apples, you don't have three, you don't have one, you have two. Okay. But the other side of that issue, which is I think what you were talking about, is you have a theory of how the universe works. And as a matter of fact, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for one mathematical equation that explains everything. The theory of everything, they call it, okay? And they want one mathematical equation. Nobody's come up with it yet, of course. And every time they do, they find flaws in it and have to start over again. And that's why they end up with things like dark matter and dark energy and inflation to make the universe work the way they think it should work. And they put numbers on all these things. Okay? I mean, what they do is they'll dream up this thing called inflation, that when we had the Big Bang, it was actually a super Big Bang. And they call it inflation because it inflated so big in so short a time. That's just a theory to take care of some other problems they had. And one was the speed of light. Okay? Einstein told him in the special relativity, the speed of light's limited. All right, so if we have this explosion, then it can't really explode that fast because the speed of light will be left behind. Okay? And so we have to make the explosion as if it wasn't an explosion, and it happened so fast that you couldn't even see it if you tried to see it. That's basically what they tell us. Okay? And then they will put numbers on this inflation, and they will tell you how fast they think it had to happen. And here's what their equation says. It had to happen in 10 to the minus 35 seconds. Okay? 10 to the minus 35 seconds. And in that time, it exploded to 10 to the 35th the size it was originally. All right? Now, these numbers don't come from actually seeing this stuff, okay? It comes from the theory. But the numbers are given to us as if they're fact, okay? As if they're fact. So that's where your saying comes in, that numbers are, how did you put it? It escaped me here. Where is it? pseudoscience. Oh, mathematics is not science. Math is not reality. Yeah, you see, so they give us 10 to the minus 35 seconds and all this stuff. Yeah, that's not reality. Okay, these men live in a dream world, literally, of their own making, because they just invented this inflation theory to solve a problem. And somebody one day had a dream. His name is Alan Guth at MIT, and says, "Oh, I know how to solve this problem. We'll just say that it exploded in such a rapid time, and it was a big explosion that you can't even imagine. And there we are." And everybody's, "Oh yeah, that's great. Great idea. How did you come up with it?" "Well, I just dreamed it last night." That's basically where it comes from, because there's no evidence for it. Okay. The same thing with dark energy and dark matter. They put numbers on these speculative theories, and the numbers do not represent reality. Why? Because nobody's ever found dark energy or dark matter. Okay. So you can throw all the numbers you want out about this stuff, but it means absolutely nothing. Okay. But then they write their papers, and they're all so complicated, and they have all these numbers everywhere, and they use, integral and differential calculus when they do this, and it's just all a bunch of bunk is what it is, to be very honest with you. Okay. But men are desperate to make their little universe work, because they don't want the one that the Bible gives them. They don't want the one that the Catholic Church gives them. And that's one where the earth is in the center and watched over very carefully by the God who made it. You see, their idea is the farther they can put the earth out there in the remote recesses of space, the less chance there is that God exists. That's what it's all about for them. Okay? That's why Carl Sagan talked about billions and billions and billions of stars out there. And we're out there somewhere with all those billions of stars. Why? Because he doesn't want to. He was an atheist. He doesn't want to face any God. And he knows that if the earth is in the center, then God exists, and he has to answer to him. Okay? So here we are. I'm just trotting down a beaten path here, but that's it. Okay. What Coriolis force? I mean, I'm beginning to wonder about you. Coriolis force in Newtonian mechanics is fictitious. You see, this is a problem for him. But that's what happens when you end up making space an absolute and making that your presupposition for all your equations. You have to wonder then, what are you going to do with the centrifugal and the Coriolis force? Well, if you're Newton, all you can do is say that they're artifacts of motion. They're not real forces. Okay? But when they send up satellites that hover over the Earth and they send probes to Mars, you know what they have to do to Newton's equations? F equals ma. They have to add in the centrifugal and the Coriolis force by hand, because Newton's equations didn't have them. All right? So that tells you the importance of the Coriolis force and the centrifugal force, because those probes would not get to Mars unless you added those forces. All right? But if you've already made them just artifacts in your Newtonian mechanics, then you're only adding them because you have to. Because in your theory, they're just artifacts. They're just fictitious. All right? So that's the importance of the Coriolis force. Go read the books that I recommend. Okay? Go watch the movie that I recommended, The Fool on the Hill, and you'll get a bird's eye view of the answer to your question. Okay? So I advise you to do that. Rob says, when I think of centrifugal force like water sprout, the faster seems to be the smaller funnel. It seems speeds multiply the closer the sprout. Not sure if I'm following you there, Rob, but that's not centrifugal force as far as I can see, because centrifugal is due to rotation. Okay, it's the outward force due to rotation. You could say this, that when you're driving in your car and you press on the brakes and you lunge forward, your body lunges forward. Okay. Well, let's use a different example. Let's say you're riding in your car and you come up to a curve and you turn the steering wheel and you curve with it. Your body tends to go out to the outside. Okay, that's centrifugal force. Okay, it's a tendency to go away from the center. The center of that circle that you're going around is to your left if you're turning left, and so your body would be moved to the right. Okay, I'm going to go to the right here. Okay, so that would be centrifugal force. All right, and it would just be the opposite if you were turning right. The centripetal force would be to your right, and the centrifugal force would be to your left. Okay, I think that will help you understand it better. Okay, I'm a little over time here, so I'm going to have to I'll let the other questions go. But anyway, it was good to be with you. If you're interested again in doing this, and I'll try to take more of your questions the next time. That will be next Thursday at 7 o'clock. Next Thursday, 7 o'clock, and the date for that is the 22nd of August. And then we'll do it again on the 29th, but I won't be here on that following week, which will be what? September the 5th. I won't be here September the 5th to do it. Okay, so we'll see you the next 2 weeks. Thanks for being with me, and I am going to sign off. Go watch the movie.